A woman who apparently grew up with every privilege anyone on this planet could possibly ask for put out a tweet claiming that she and others are they're embracing socialism because they've never tasted American prosperity. Charlotte Alter said, AOC and I were both born the same year. She was a Dunkaroos kid. I liked fruit roll-ups. People our age have never experienced American prosperity in our adult lives, which is why so many millennials are embracing democratic socialism. And she was annihilated, metaphorically. You can see this ratio here, 11,000 replies and only 1.6 thousand retweets. In the United States, I've found that there are these young, uber wealthy, privileged elites who want more and don't know how to get it. And because of this, they act as though they have never tasted American prosperity. I grew up on Chicago's South Side. This is from one of my tweets in response to this. I grew up on the South Side. There were gangs, a lot of them. One dude in my neighborhood was made to kill people when he was a teenager so he could join the gang. He went to juvie until he was 18. Some people died of heroin overdoses. Someone I actually used to hang out with when I was, 13 or 14 died of a heroin overdose. A friend of mine recounted a story to us when I was a teenager of him watching people drag a dead body across his alley. That's life in Chicago. There's a lot of murders, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of drugs and gang violence. Charlotte here, I believe, may have grown up in Chicago because her father is very influential in Chicago politics. Well, her father went to Harvard. Apparently, according to one of the responses from Ashley Ray Goldenberg, she said, your parents are famous. You and your siblings obviously benefited from your parents' connections in your careers, and you are from a town with a median family income of $126,000. And yet she acts as though she has anything to do with the underprivileged. In fact, Charlotte Alter has a cover story on Time magazine. She has about 27,000 followers. She's a verified Twitter user. She is, in fact, not only in the top most privileged elites of the world, of the United States as well. My understanding is that less than 1% of people have more than 10,000 followers on Twitter. And beyond 20,000, you're starting to get into like the 0.05 and 0.1%. Admittedly, I recognize that I am in this privileged class of high-profile individuals who have the ability to speak. And that's why I'm going to talk about this. Because I want to specifically call out the ultra-wealthy uber elites who act as though they suffer, who act as though they don't have the privilege. We can look at what happened with that college scandal, where a famous actress, several of them, paid bribes to get their children into schools and on athletic programs. Why? What's the point? They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars because they want to cheat, because they want to take. And then they turn around and act like it's the working class of this country who are terrified of these free trade agreements, which have resulted in a massive economic shift, which have resulted in massive power centers and wealth centers focusing on major cities. It's resulted in the decimation of middle America. These people now in their unemployment, it's been reported, are taking opioids. There's a lot there's a lot of things that trigger the opioid epidemic. One of which is depression and unemployment, and people, they have no purpose. They have nothing to do. So they fill that hole in their lives with drugs. It's not the sole reason, maybe even not the main reason, but there is a correlation. And what do we hear? We hear that we should be supporting the wrong one. Let's jump back. We hear that we should be supporting the Green New Deal because and democratic socialism, because the ultra wealthy elites, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a bartender, still one of the wealthy elites of this country and the world, especially when you consider where other people have come from. She went to Boston University. I don't recognize her as one of the most wealthy people in this country or anything like that. But if you were to compare my childhood with someone like Cortez, yes, she is the privileged elite. Hands down. She's now substantially more privileged and more elite. And although she likes to claim she's from the Bronx and she has this rough upbringing and all that stuff, New York is still is one of the wealthiest places on the planet. Why they think they need democratic socialism, it just doesn't make sense to me. I just think it's not true. I went to Brazil. I went to the favelas. If you're not familiar with what a favela is, they're shanty towns. There's no regulation for the most part. These are houses built on top of houses. Some people have to walk through someone else's house to get to the next house. They collapse when it rains because of mudslides that live in the hills, where they were essentially pushed out throughout history. I visited a family. We did an interview about the hardships and the police who were going through the favelas and pacifying them, taking out the gangs. One of the people there asked me why the rich people in America were protesting. And I was confused by this and asked what they meant. The woman clarified that the Occupy Wall Street protests, why were the rich people protesting? And I laughed and I thought, well, no, the people who were protesting Occupy Wall Street were regular Americans, not rich people. And she laughed and said, all Americans are rich. Because the average income for a Brazilian is something like $8,000. If you live in a favela, it's substantially less than that, although things have been improving. But to this woman who didn't live in America, what she saw with Occupy Wall Street was a bunch of wealthy, privileged young people who live in one of the wealthiest places on the planet complaining they weren't wealthy enough. And this trickles up. Because I think when it comes to, individuals, everything's relative. For me, I try to travel and understand people. So when I see one of the most privileged people in this country and the world, Charlotte Alter, from a wealthy, I don't necessarily say wealthy, but the neighborhood they grew up in, apparently, the fact that her father went to Harvard, they're famous producers and high profile, they have a high profile in politics. This is somebody who has more privilege than most people ever. And I'm curious why then she's acting as though she hasn't tasted prosperity. Well, she did clarify 13 minutes ago in response to the outrage and the offense she's caused. She said, I am not talking about my personal experience. This is from my reporting on why many millennials are moving so far to the left, which is supported by polling. This is what AOC said in our interview. An entire generation, which is now becoming one of the largest electorates in America, came of age and never saw American prosperity, she says. I have never seen that or experienced it really in my adult life. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went to Boston University. I couldn't afford to go to college. I don't know if she took out student loans or how she went there, but it was just never a reality for me to take out loans and go to school. I didn't finish high school. See, life is hard when you grow up on the south side of Chicago. I don't want to act like I had bad parents or anything. My parents were fantastic. And probably the only reason I'm successful is because of good parenting. Although we went through typical hardships. We lost our home when I was around 13 years old. Things were rough. It wasn't easy. I had friends who died, who joined gangs. And fortunately for me, I played music, skateboarding, and I worked on computers. So I was able to learn and expand and eventually get out of that neighborhood. It's not the worst neighborhood in Chicago, but it's not the best either. Now I see people acting like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't know what prosperity is. Well, I'll tell you from the perspective of someone from the South Side. The fact that you lived a rather normal American life to me is prosperity. The fact that you ate Dunkaroos or fruit roll-ups. The fact that you weren't homeless. That's prosperity. Growing up the way I did, traveling around, meeting people, I started to think about what it truly means to have. And I realized this at a very young age, having spent, some nights sleeping outside, crashing at friends' house, sometimes being a burden. And I thought, you know what? What does it mean to have something or to not have something? What does it mean to be prosperous? If you are in the middle of the woods, buck naked, you still are not in a bad situation. No, you're healthy, you're alive, you've got some work to do. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked and you're bleeding, now you're in trouble. This is a net negative. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked, but you have a sharp stick, you now have something. And that is more than what the world grants you. To everybody who was born in America, you live in the pinnacle of wealth and prosperity. Sure, there are other places on this planet that are beautiful and wealthy. And there are certain countries that have a higher average, median income and things like that. But I was walking past the Time Life building in New York and this beautiful marble in a fountain. And I looked around at the dramatic wealth of everyone who lives in New York, access to clean, fresh water, emergency services, police force. And I thought, this is like the heart of Rome during the Roman Empire. The wealthiest individuals who are gluttonous and don't understand what they truly have because they haven't experienced anything outside of that. These young people now claim that we need a Green New Deal, that they haven't tasted prosperity, that we need democratic socialism. Because their life has been so good, they truly do not understand what it means to be without. The sheer ignorance of this tweet. In this post, she talks about how millennials are moving far to the left. But this isn't unique to anybody or any generation. In fact, there has been a trend over the past several generations, from silent to boomer to Gen X to millennial, where they slowly move more progressive. We can see this not necessarily in this one chart. We can talk about gender neutral pronouns. We can talk about Trump, etc. We can talk about racism, the role of government. But I'll make one interesting point here. Gen Z and millennials differ from older generation in views on Trump, role of government, and growing diversity in US. We can see that Gen Z does believe that government should do more to solve problems, but something changed. The millennial generation is 1 point less likely to approve of Trump's job performance. Gen Z is 1 point more likely to believe in growing racial and ethnic diversity. While she believes that millennials are moving further to the left, there is also reason to believe that Gen Z is actually the first in a long time to break the trend. So there's a lot of different metrics. Gen Z is actually really interesting. I think the reason for this change may have something to do with the internet, perhaps. But the last thing I want to bring up when looking at someone who's overly privileged and think they're not is who these people actually are. In an article I've talked about before, what does this group look like? In talking about progressive activists, they say they're much more likely to be rich, highly educated, and white. They are nearly twice as likely as the average to make more than $100,000 per year. They are nearly 3 times as likely to have a postgraduate degree. In a letter dated March 8th, an address to Markey and Ocasio-Cortez, the AFL-CIO Energy Committee ripped apart the Green New Deal. And this is from a left-wing source. If you don't represent labor unions, then who do you represent? You have these people who are as wealthy and privileged as they come. They point the finger at the poor, unemployed, and opioid addicted in this country. They blame the working class who is desperate and asking for help. They don't know what it's like to suffer, and they truly believe they are the ones suffering. The overwhelmingly white, wealthy, and highly educated, pointing the finger at the poor and blaming their race, embracing identitarianism. These people are the problem. This rhetoric is the problem. I'm going to leave it there. Stick around. I got one more video. My next video is coming up on my main channel, youtube.com/timcast at 4 p.m. Yes, it's a different channel. I'll see you there.